It is the 45th installment of the annual Marion Thompson Wright Lecture Series. This year's theme of No Nation, Black Activism for Transnational Liberation, highlighting the interplay of ideas and strategies that continue to bolster liberation efforts in the U.S. and abroad. This series celebrates freedom movements that transcended geopolitical boundaries in pursuit of more than just societies, paying homage to Black anti-oppression activists and organizers around the world. Of No Nation emphasizes the role of Black resistance in achieving global justice from 1619 to the present. And joining us, as always, to talk about the Marion Thompson Wright Lecture Series are two wonderful individuals. Director of the Clement A. Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience, Professor, Federated Department of History at Rutgers, Newark, Professor, and NJIT, is Jack Tchen. Dr. Tchen, great to have you on the show.
Hi, always great to be with you, Doug.
And also joining us is the person who is responsible for putting on this conference each year, the Associate Professor of Professional Practice and Associate Director of the Price Institute on Ethnicity, Culture, and the Modern Experience, Dr. Lacey Hunter. Lacey, great to have you here.
It's good to be back. Thank you, Doug.
So this year's theme, Of No Nation, Black Activism for Transnational Liberation. Explain it more for us, Lacey.
Sure. So Black internationalism or and transnational activism are really about this collective spirit, collective energy of working beyond your own nation or national boundaries in pursuit of civic freedoms, economic freedoms, social freedoms, whatever it is in the space where you are pursuing liberation. And so this year, I've really been thinking a lot about that collaborative spirit where people look at the conditions that they're living through in their nation, but are also looking around out at the world and recognizing that so many more of us are facing similar circumstances or are living through similar conditions. And so this is a time for us to reflect on how we work together beyond what seem to be impossibilities. And we're doing that by thinking about some episodes where Afro-Americans or Afro-Caribbeans, however we want to think about it, across the United States and the Americas, have worked globally to help people resist things like land dispossession or resist in access to education and so on and so forth. And so it's going to be a really, really good day. We're using the academic terms, but really this is about, how we come together in times of need and how we do that in ways that are global and not just, about our local city, state, or, nation politics.
And the Marion Thompson Wright Lecture Series, the 45th edition, will take place on Saturday, February 15th from 9:30 in the morning to 3:30 in the afternoon. Paul Robeson Campus Center at Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey, and that's at 350 Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard in Newark. Lacey, you always put together many scholarly speakers who have impressed us through the years. This year is no exception. Why don't you take a moment and tell us about the speakers that you have lined up for us?
Sure. So we are going to have with us four incredible people, one of whom is going to start our day, and he is activist, lawyer, scholar, just brilliant and wonderful, warm person, James Jimmy Garrett. Folks who are familiar with the Black student movement at the height of the 1960s across the nation will probably have seen a lot of iconic images of him, and those show up on our poster, which is coming out very soon. Um, Dr. Garrett is just really amazing and coming out of the shifting civil rights movement in the late 1950s, early 1960s, he is partly responsible for us having ethnic studies, Black studies departments nationwide. We get the first one out in California, and he is directly responsible, again, partly because he's a co-founder of this movement, but we can say he's partly responsible for having those. Of course, we're dealing with contest over how we initiate those now, but we're certainly thankful to have them, right, where we can learn about each other in a different way. So he is going to start the day, talk about the organization SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, his work with CORE, the Congress on Racial Equality, and he's also going to talk about the global or internationalist dimensions of that movement. I was talking with him earlier this week, and I think he's going to blow us away. We're also going to have Paula Marie Seniors, who is a wonderful professor and one of the very few who studies a woman named May Mallory. Her work really funnels this conversation around like community feminism, right? And so how do women work together for equality and support of one another, not just in the United States, but globally. Dr. Senior's parents are the co-founders of what's called the Monroe Defense Fund. And this is an element of Black history that we kind of shy away from. When there are moments where activists will say, hey, listen, we're just trying to register to vote. We're just trying to rally together and have conversations in our churches, our community halls. But every time we come together, someone's shooting up the building. Someone is setting things on fire. So we are now going to advocate that we have armed self-defense, right? Not in pursuit of hurting anyone else, but just in pursuit of warding off the dangers that we're experiencing. And so we're going to have that part of our conversation, which is new in terms of MTW. We haven't been able to kind of explore those more sobering topics, but she's going to walk us through a little bit of that as she talks about her family's role in, creating this committee that helps to support those activists who are trying to be peaceful, right, but also very, very aware of the violence around them, and who ultimately end up resisting colonial oppression or supporting colonial oppression in places like Tanzania and Nicaragua, et cetera, right? And then we have two other scholars who are more international in their focus. And one is Professor Quito Swan, whose work is phenomenal, certainly in its novelty. He has this award-winning book called Black Pacifica, and he's really thinking about the ways that Black activism from the United States and across the Americas moves into the Pacific Islands. And how are the Black communities or Black and Brown communities there? How are they negotiating, looking towards decolonization? And how are they trying to work together in what we can sort of think of as an Afro-Asian coalition, right? Of course, and Jack will talk about this, how are they influenced by thinkers like C.L.R. James and others who are really very, very forward and ahead of their times in terms of thinking about Pan-African identities, Pan-African and coalition movements. So he's going to be great. And we're going to then have Professor Keisha Perry, whose work is also phenomenal and who's exploring the activist communities, activist efforts of Black women in Brazil, who've been resisting not only physical violence in and around their communities, and of course, murders and assaults. We know that now if you've been paying attention to Brazilian news. But she's really been thinking for many years about women who are fighting land dispossession, right? And of course, what are they doing with and on the land that they're working on? And this really links back to my first curated program, which thought about food justice, right? How does one steward the land? And so this is a really interesting kind of circling back to that moment, but thinking about it more in the other Americas. All right, so I've talked a whole lot here. I'll concede to Jack.
Yeah, but the lineup once again, the powerful speakers that you have put together. We talked about this in previous years, how when you reach out, this has been such a prestigious conference through the years. People say, yeah, I want to be involved. Jack, I know you want to talk about Professor C.L.R. James and the Caribbean-born, you know, uh, deeply influenced all four of the speakers here. And I know you even sent me an interview from 1970 of Professor James with Studs Terkel for Chicago's WFMT, a really in-depth conversation, and invite anyone to check that out. that interview from 1970. Talk about the influence of Professor James and how it intertwines with not only the speakers here, but what you want to get across in this conference.
Thanks, Doug. Professor CLR James was a polymath. He was a genius journalist. He wrote about cricket as a way to talk about the Caribbean and his life. He was an avid cricket player and fan. But he was also, maybe first and foremost, someone who was connected, deeply connected to the liberation movements that were emerging at the time. So he knew, for example, Dr. Du Bois, he knew Marcus Garvey. He was deeply in touch with the negritude movements that were emerging out of French colonial Africa. He was deeply connected to the movements in Haiti, and just knew all these people and was constantly traveling around offering his deep historical remembering. And I use the word remembering in the multiple sense of not just we think of remembering as recall, but he was actually penning the scholarship that would help people put together the silenced past, the pieces of history that were never given acknowledgement in the Western Academy. So he was really out there writing these books, Black Jacobins. He wrote an amazing book on Moby Dick while he was detained at Ellis Island, really protesting and analyzing the emergence of the national security state. He was one of our early anti-authoritarians. So in some ways, he's ever present and ever modern in terms of really thinking about the dilemmas of being colonial subjects. And in some ways, the call now that's happening globally is to return to that colonial moment and to return to a moment in which violence and lynchings put people, quote unquote, put people in their place. So remembering also means that we have to re-engage, I think, with scholars such as CLR James and M.A. Cesar, who was really kind of a writer and poet, who was also a friend. They were friends. And they wrote, Cesar wrote his poem, A Negritude, at the same year that the Black Jacobins came out in 1938. So in any case, this amazing interview with Studs Terkel is a great chance, I think, really in 1970, which was just year one of the MTW talks, right? And here we are in year 45, right? Or year two, I should say. And I think this kind of circling back that these four speakers have to James especially speaks to not just what's happening in the United States and the Caribbean, Africa, but also Latin America, Asia, and the larger world right now. So it's really a very strong program, and I encourage people to go back and listen to this 1970 interview. 1970 was a critical moment as well. We know the Vietnam War was raging. The Chicago Democratic Party had just met. Sly and the Family Stone had just performed in Chicago's park, adjacent to the demonstrations that were emerging against the war. And that moment speaks to what's going on now too. This interview is powerful, and it's done by Studs Terkel, who, as a boy who was raised with his radio program, he's kind of the founding patriarch of oral history, and the history that he tells with James is remarkable. So it's a very, very current interview.
One thing about the Marion Thompson Wright Lecture Series is it's for everybody, right? It's for anyone who wants to learn, but also, it's in the student atmosphere of Rutgers Newark, right? And the thirst for knowledge, I would think at this time, is maybe more than ever in some capacities. And we're so thankful that we have both of you teaching our younger students about history because you have to know the past. I just happened to stumble across Selma and watched it again yesterday, right? Of course, we all celebrated Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Day and coming up in February, always, Black History Month. But you and I have talked about this for years. Black History Month is every day. It's not just in February, but it does mark certain things. But as I watched Selma again, the dynamic between the president and Dr. King at times was chilling because of his reaction to Dr. King's that say, hey, it all stems back to we got to be able to vote. If we can't vote, we can't change anything, right? So it was a strong reminder of where we were, and in some respects, where we need to be as we continue on. Lacey, putting together this program, how much do you think about your students?
Hmm. Oh man, obsessively to be good to be quite honest. I had an interesting educational journey, which we don't have to delve into, but I think about myself and what I needed as I was finding in some ways on my own, in some ways, in many ways, with my father's encouragement, people like John Henry Clark and the like, who would lead me to C.L.R. James and Eric Williams, and I'd be led to Du Bois, and I think also about the gaps that existed for me, not only in my own kind of familial history, just things that people can't, as Jack says, recall, right, or they can't remember. Um, because they've been, as James tells us in many of his works, kind of overconditioned to behave in ways that are going to be seen as acceptable, right? And so they forget or erase um, specific parts of memory and historical memory in particular. So I think, I start thinking there, and from there it kind of like proceeds organically. And I think about the questions that my students have, and often there's a great deal of frustration in terms of, I don't understand how people sat back and allowed this to happen, right? I don't understand why there are these contentions. Or, what I hear most is, why am I just learning about this now? I have taken on the posture, which, I don't necessarily recommend for everybody, but I am the kind of person who's unafraid of, I don't like conflict, but I'm not afraid of it. So I initiate my classes now by saying to my students, we're going to learn together as though you are the last cohort of people who will ever take an ethnic studies course, ever take a Black studies course. And we're going to extract everything that we can because it's not guaranteed next year or next semester. And they kind of look at me like I'm a nutcase, which I expect. But by the second or the third week, then something kind of turns on, right? And they're asking better questions, and they want to know more, and that's just it fills my heart. I don't always hit everybody, but I think I hit the right notes at the right times as often as I can, and for me what I want most, when they say, a thing is never done until it's like fully complete, right? And so I know I'm not quite done in terms of the work that I'm doing overall. But when I get to the point where I can look at the completed stuff, one of the things I'm really hoping for my students and for myself, is that they can look at history not in segments, right? I think unfortunately, I've not yet had an experience where the overwhelming majority of my students see their Italian, Polish, Chinese, Filipino, Trinidadian, Nigerian, Cuban, Colombian histories as interlocked, right? That we're so unfortunately taught that what happens to Black people is really just about Black people, and what happens to white people is really just about white people, and that's untrue in every way. And so, when I think through all of the topics, I'm really thinking about how can we kind of see each other more. And we don't have to see each other as the same, but we must see one another. And because if you can see somebody, you're more likely to at least try to hear them. And even if what you hear is contradictory to your own experience, you might be less resistant to the hearing part And from there, I think you can generate dialogue. And so for me, it sort of builds in those stair steps. But, I'm the core of like, how could I serve? If I imagine myself back in the undergrad years, how could I do more of what I needed at different moments? Embody the professors that I have who are just like spitfire inspiring, and who pushed me to ask questions I had never been presented with before, and who continue to inspire me in the questions that I try to mine out from my students. So obsessively is the short answer.
And a great answer. And we're so thankful that you are in the position that you are in. And I've mentioned that a couple of times, but it is important because as somebody who teaches college classes for almost 30 years, reaching students sometimes can be difficult, but if you can see it in their eyes. When they get it, you can see the ones who want to know more and have that thirst for knowledge. Speaking of a thirst for knowledge, not everybody who's coming to that conference even knows who Clem Price was, right? Clem Price was Dr. Price was a great friend, not only of myself, but many people who came to Newark and was one of the first people to greet me with a huge hug and started off this series with Giles Wright. But this has been Jack Tchen's baby now for quite a while. And Jack, you and I talk about this almost every year, but what has Jack Tchen learned over the years through MTW?
That's a great question, Doug. We should have this discussion at a bar over a good meal. But I'll give you kind of a quick answer, which is that um, when I came of age, which was I entered college. I'm older. I'm older than Lacey, and Doug, I'm not sure how old you are, but we might be comparable
I'm
ages.
turning 99 this month.
You're 99. Okay, well, we're about the same age, yeah. So I entered the University of Wisconsin. I'm a public school boy from the suburbs of Chicago, but then went to the University of Wisconsin, 1969, and it was the time that I was going to become a geneticist, God forbid. And the
Something
anti-war
I never thought about, Jen, just so you know, that never came into my my thought process. So,
well, it's funny. I've come back around because I look at eugenics now. I look at authoritarianism now. So that's what I'm teaching this semester. But I entered in and my world changed. It was really through books, not so much through the classes, although I had some brilliant historian lecturers who just took me through the streets of Paris when the revolutions and the republics were being fought over in the streets of Paris. And I began to understand that, and this is something that is in the discussion with Studs Terkel and CLR James, is that uh, scholars need to also be advocates. They can't simply be removed academics. They need to be engaged and be speaking to many different kinds of publics. Myself, coming from an Asian background and having been an anti-Vietnam War organizer and activist, I really believe that so many Americans at the time just were not aware of what was really going on and needing to kind of communicate across those barriers that in which their sons and my fellow classmates were being sent to fight a war that they thought was about one thing, but was not about that, right? So there's depths of what happens, led by politicians, and it's not simply the authoritarian, rising right-wing populist types, but also other politicians, who lead us into wars and who enact domestic policies that sometimes seem good, but actually are they're also advocating wars overseas. There are many contradictions, and this is why history became what I came to study, because I began to see the patterns that continued between what was happening when I was growing up, the Chinese exclusion laws, the emergence of Jim Crow, authoritarian kind of white nationalist politicians, and how all those different kinds of histories that we can study and memorize the dates of actually have a deep personal connection to all of us. It's all these things have impacted all of us personally in one way or another, from eugenics-driven immigration laws, eugenics policies declaring people as criminals or criminally insane. And this includes folks who now think of themselves as white folks, Irish and Italians and Jews, were really caught within these same kinds of historical cycles and forces. So for me, learning history is really about how we can understand, how we can break through and break out of the boxes that we've been kind of put into, and understand that we have a shared history. So every year, MTW offers breaking out of those boxes. So MTW has never been strictly about African American history. Of course it is, but it's really for everyone. And that was part of the brilliance of Dr. Price and Dr. Wright, Giles Wright, and the very fact that it's named after Marion Thompson Wright, who's really one of the first African American women PhDs, and the deep commitment that all three of them had to public knowledge, and to make knowledge. Of course, we have to write our academic books to get tenure. There's that problem. But then, really, what is it for? Is it for our own career development? Is it for us to attend annual conferences and speak amongst ourselves? Or is it really for the larger communities that we're all a part of and depend on and have nurtured us? So for me, it's in some ways finding that home and that tradition in the Black community and in MTW, because for Asian Americans, we've not had that right or privilege because of exclusion laws. But in looking at the exclusion laws, I begin to understand what the interconnections are to Black history, to Indigenous history, to Latin American history. So I think that's a spirit that that MTW has always had. And for me, it's an honor to be involved in this and to be working with people like Lacey and many other really fantastic colleagues at our campus who have this spirit of being committed to the students. And our students are amongst the most diverse anywhere in the world. So they bring a knowledge and brilliance themselves that they oftentimes don't know they have, right? And in some ways, it's our job to help work with them and frame their understanding of the worlds that they come from so that their brilliance can begin to shine through. And it's not so much pursuing being a pharmacist or somebody in supply chain management, but it's really helping them, and hopefully they will get these jobs, but it's really to help them understand how they can be citizens of a democratic and very diverse nation. And that's the unresolved experiment of the American experience. It's unresolved.
One of the things that I try to always instill in my students is to seek out people like Dr. Hunter and say, hey, can I just have a cup of coffee with you and just talk for an hour, either about getting a job in the field or learning more. And I'm sure if you had that phone call, and I'm sure you've had many of them, you would be thrilled to nurture that quest that I've been talking about. Those who want to come to the conference, Dr. Hunter, how do they do it?
Well, we have an Eventbrite, which will be connected probably somewhere to this video or interview recording. Sign up or register. We want you to be there in person. If you can't be there in person, you can certainly watch a live stream. But we are right on the Rutgers Newark campus in the Paul Robeson Campus Center. Speaking of Black internationalists, Paul Robeson was an activist who moved well beyond US boundaries. But you are going to go right to the second floor of the Paul Robeson Campus Center, and you'll meet us there. you can't miss us. There'll be lots of guides, signs, there'll be live music, a little bit of jazz music that's coming to start the day off for us after Chief Vincent Mann blesses the day. We have to have Chief Mann bless the day now because I feel like that's like our secret sauce for success. He just kind of like creates this atmosphere of peace and unity, and it's wonderful. Sorry, I went off on a tangent, but we are right on the Rutgers Newark campus. You can enter through the MLK Boulevard entrance, and there'll be folks there to guide you into the room where we'll be. Or if you come on campus from the side, either Warren Street or Bleecker, you're just going to walk towards the centermost part of that main campus quad, and there should be folks outside to greet you and wave you in.
I think the best way I can wrap this up would be saying that the wonderful Dr. Price, looking down on all of us, he's so proud of what you both are continuing in his tradition. Uh, Dr. Jack Tchen, thanks so much for everything that you do.
Thank you, Doug, for everything you do. It's a
Yeah.
partnership, right? So thank you.
Indeed, it is my pleasure each and every year to get the word out about this conference. And Lacey, once again, congratulations. I'm sure you're probably already working on next year, 46. So thanks
We got
again.
some good stuff.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.